Okay, so I'm going to explain how to write about assignment 4, and I'm just going to talk about one aspect of it. So if you go to the assignment 4 folder, this is under course materials. There's a sheet of assignment guidelines, and that will bring you to this document here. So um, there's 3 different things that you can write about. You can read this part on your own, but essentially what you're going to be writing about is language. Um, and something that you can keep in mind is that you'll be writing about you'll be doing uh, 3 things. You'll identify and summarize a language practice or language phenomenon you are a part of, or that you've experienced. Then you will reflect on it and analyze it. And third, you'll share any anything you learned about it. So, for example, this is really similar to assignment 1. Assignment 1, we had to summarize an article and then share our thoughts on it and our reactions to it and kind of analyze it and take it apart and do those sorts of things. That's exactly what we're doing, only it's with language. So there are 3 options that you can write about. You can describe and analyze a specific event that shaped your literacy development, examining the effects of the event on your development as a literate person. So this is the real key here is it has to be a specific event, one specific event. So this could be, you know, a particular experience you had with a teacher that changed the way that you wrote. It can be something like that. I'm not going to go into much detail about this because this is typically for people that are like they really just love writing, and people that love writing have lots of things to say about it already. That's very like easy to them. That's similar to this one, the describing your literacy history, the history of what you remember about learning to read and write since childhood, particularly the occasions, people, and materials and motivations involved in the processes. So this is one that most everyone can write about, but it's a lot harder if you don't typically think about writing, and it might be kind of difficult for some people to get interested in. Not to say that you can learn a lot of interesting things about the different ways that you've spent your time writing. But anyway, this video will mostly focus on this option, which is describe and analyze a literacy practice you participate in. For example, music, sports, dance, video games, religion, etc., and how that practice makes you part of a certain group or community. So I'll just give you a couple of examples of this, because we all have hobbies, and at the end of this video, I'll ask you to write about the hobbies that you're a part of and go into some detail about it. But let's just take football as an example. There's a lot of terminology in football that if you're part of the football community and you watch football, you know about it. And if you're not, then you just don't. And so I'll just give you, a brief idea. Obviously, like, what is a touchdown? 2-point conversion. Offsides. These are all things that special teams. These are all terms that if you play football, then you know. Some of them are basic terms. Like, these are all basic terms that I think anybody that knows anything about football would know. But some of the other stuff is a little bit more specific. Like, for example, running a route or running a concept. I don't know anything about this, and someone explained it to me, but now I've already forgotten what it is. But I just know that those are the 2 things, because I saw there was this Twitter controversy over this football player who was surprised that that a woman knew this, and he got eaten alive on Twitter about how sexist he was that he made this comment about it. But anyway, you can look it up and find out more about it. But anyway, this is something about football that if you know a lot about football that you know. And I remember I lived in I worked in Flint for 2.5 years, and I remember all my friends there loved football, and so I tried so hard to get in, but having years not followed football, it's like every commercial break they were just talking about all these things like and the funny thing was is like I remember observing it as an outsider and thinking like they only spent like maybe a minute or so talking about the play that just happened, and then after that it was all this banter about who do you think is going to be making it to the playoffs, and who do you think they're going to be going up against, and who's going to be MVP and all these other stuff. I just had no idea about, and I was like, oh, I thought if I knew about football, the rules and stuff, then I could talk about it. But I didn't know anything about it. So anyway, that's something that you could write about. You could summarize about your experience with playing football or reading about football and knowing about football, talking about it with your family. And then, that's my observations as an outsider, but maybe you have other observations that you could make about it of like, what makes somebody a real football fan and what makes somebody a more casual fan, and what are some funny things that you notice about it. Like it is always funny to listen to people's talk about, oh, if I was there, I would have done this or that, and it's like, well, yeah, but you weren't on the field in the stress of that moment. So anyway, let me talk about a group that I was a part of. This is something I did in high school a lot, but D&D. I don't know if any of you know what that is, but you might. Okay, I'll just write some terms. Character sheets, D20, D8, a D6. You might wonder what these things are, and usually it's a lowercase d. So this is really old school, but THAC0 with a 0, what that is. Anyway, you'll have to look it up. But anyway, so D&D stands for Dungeons and Dragons. So in the beginning of the paper, I summarize all the stuff that I learned about it, maybe how I got involved in it, where I got started. I think I was like 12 years old. And anyway, so then after that, then you would reflect on it. And there's lots of things that I've learned like years later, looking back on that time of my life. And one of the things was that there were nerd hierarchies. And like there I was a Dungeons and Dragons nerd, and we had the most we lived in a small town, and we had the most coveted nerd group, and other nerds wanted to get involved in our Dungeons and Dragons game. And I remember there was a group of like maybe 3 or 4 that wanted to play with us, and we said, no, you can't play with us, you're too weird. And so they went, and my friend's sister started a dungeon master. She started to become a dungeon master, and then she organized this little group there. And it was funny because we rejected them, but then we were all like curious about it, so we would ask my friend's sister, what do they do? What do they play like? And the one, she's like, well, the one guy, he's a bit weird. I don't know why, but he has a half dragon character, and he always like eats children in whatever village he goes to, and we were like, oh my goodness, in a fantasy world where you can play and be anything, that's what you do. You eat children. It's just unbelievable. You can be anything in this world, and that's what you do. So we were, kind of patting ourselves on the back. Yeah, we definitely made the right choice in excluding him, And so I thought this was just so interesting that here we are. We're not the most popular people in the whole school. There were a lot of like sports people that were really well known, stuff like that. I mean, a lot of us were involved in theater too, which but there were plenty of people that were involved in theater who were not involved in Dungeons and Dragons that were really well known and popular. But I thought it was so funny that even among nerds, there's a hierarchy of nerds there, and you might write about that, and you might write about like, well, why is it that people do this? Why do we exclude people? And what's the benefit of that? What's the drawback of that? And so on. So So that's just one example that you could write about. I'll give you another example. A student wrote about this swearing, and they wrote about learning to swear and what that means. And so I'll just give you an example. They had as their thesis that swearing it was a symbol of maturity. I thought that was such a funny, kind of ridiculous idea at first when I first read it. But then as they explained it, I thought, wow, that's really, I never thought about it like that. They were saying that, like, first they had stories of swearing, of like when they got caught. Then they had stories of swearing among friends and how it kind of showed that they were cool and they could be accepted and everything. But then they talked about this turning point about swearing in front of their parents. And they talked about how, like, once they started swearing in front of their parents and their parents didn't punish them, that they sort of felt like that was their they were no longer a child, that their parents no longer regulated what they could and could not say, and that was sort of like, so swearing to them became like a symbol of maturity. So this is the thing that I'm talking about. You'll summarize a thing that you do, and then you will reflect on it, and then you'll share some kind of pattern that you noticed or some kind of thing that's really interesting about it. I thought that was so interesting, the idea that swearing, which is normally seen as so taboo, and some people might think it's childish, or not the best way to express yourself, but then somehow it came to mean that you were mature. I'll tell you another thing you could write about, be like Facebook, and like writing a Facebook post, and perhaps doing something like writing captions for photos. So these are things that, like, some of us have had Facebook accounts for like several years, so you could actually go back to when you first had it. Like I've had Facebook, I think, for like 14 years. It's kind of insane, now that I think of it. But I could go back to the posts that I used to post, and then the posts that eventually were posted later, and you could analyze the way that you posted and what did you say and what kind of things did you say, and you could even maybe you could even write it like a step-by-step guide. How to get likes. So that's something that you could write about. Anyway, so think about that. What is a way that you could turn that into something? If you have any kind of collection of writing over the course of time, I think that you could look at. That would be really interesting. Some people deliberate over how to write a post for a long time. They write and they rewrite and they write and they rewrite, and so it's like some people, we see things that they post and we're like, wow, they're so clever and smart. When in reality, they not to say that they're not clever, but they sat there writing it for a long time, spending a lot of time thinking about how they would present themselves. The last example that I want to share with you is something I think would be interesting, is if any of you are trolls. For those of you who don't know about trolls, I don't know how you could not know about trolls, but if I were to write a paper, it'd be so interesting to talk about trolling, if that was something that you were a part of. And I remember when the internet first came out, in high school. I remember my friend and I hearing about this website called Spin Chat. I don't even know if it's still around, but it was this place where people would role play, and they would pretend that they were these different characters, and they would talk about quests that they would be going on. And the funniest thing is that even though we were nerds and we were role players in real life, we thought it was such a ridiculous thing that you would do this in a chat room. And so we would essentially go into the chat room and try to cause as much mischief and just not take it seriously as possible. And now that I look back on it, it was really awful what we were doing, because we were like really ruining people's experience. At first, we realized, okay, if you do things too aggressive, the admins will just block you and they just kick you out of the chat room. And so we couldn't be too aggressive. So then we started to go incognito. We would have a certain character, and we would have a bio and whatever. And there was this guy named Iceman. We were always trying to heckle, and he always got annoyed that we would try to burn him with fire. He's like, "Why do you think it's Iceman's vulnerable to fire? Like it's just so ridiculous." We're like, "It's not ridiculous. Your name is Iceman. That's why we think fire works on you." No matter what we tried to do, he was always the way that it would work is you'd say like, um, you'd type in the action. It'd be like burns Iceman with fire, and then when you hit enter, you had to hurry and type does so, and then that meant you got to burn him with fire. And then you'd get lectured about how fire doesn't work on him for some weird reason. But anyway, most of the time, Iceman had a much faster internet connection because we actually had dial-up, if you can imagine what that's like. And anyway, so we just were not as fast as Iceman. He was just so much faster, and he would always find a way to block us. And then he would do something terrible in response, and then he could always type does so, and he had these like long paragraphs that he must have kept saved up on his computer, which we were always impressed by, even though it's kind of pathetic when you think about it. But anyway, but one time we got the jump on him. We were able to put. I remember it was a team effort, but we were able to put him into a sandwich, and then eat him, and we got away with it. And we typed it does so, and we did so. But anyway, and then the sad thing was we got thrown out of the room anyway. It's like, man, we just defeated Iceman by eating him in a sandwich. It's like, oh, but that's a ridiculous way to eat someone, or to defeat someone. So anyway, but I could write about that, and I could write about like, okay, why was I trolling? Why was I causing mischief online? And then just sort of explore that, just thinking out loud and on paper. Why do people torture people online that they don't know? Is it because they don't know them? Do all people really want to be mischievous online? I don't know. Those are all things that you could write about and sort of explore within yourself, and you could maybe ask your friends. You could talk to them about it. These are all just ideas that you could do to talk about language practices. So what I want you to do now is write a list of literacy practices you are a part of. Okay, so we've already seen a list so far. There was Dungeons and Dragons, football, swearing, Facebooking, trolling. There might be other things that you're a part of, and so anyway, work on looking at make a list of literacy practices you're a part of. Then choose 2 or 3 and write a list of vocabulary words and concepts you must know to participate. Okay, you know what the words are that you're a part of. The thing that you're a part of, the group that you're a part of. And this group can be as limited as a particular video game that you play, or it could be as wide as a religion that you're a part of. Those are all things that you could do. So write a list of vocabulary words and be as detailed as possible, and ask yourself this question: how do you know you are an insider or an outsider in this group or practice? Anybody that is involved in music, it's like you can separate who knows about music and who really doesn't, because people that they say, oh yeah, I really like music, and then you're like, oh, what do you like to listen to? And it's like all pop music and stuff, and it's like, okay, like not all pop artists are bad, but like I don't know, it just seems like it's kind of empty, the ones that don't even write their own music. The ones that write their own music and they have a message and they have a following, that's really interesting. But anyway, so there's like ways that you can, and again, that's reflecting my own judgments and my own thoughts. You might have your own judgments and thoughts about like what makes a person an insider and outsider of a particular thing that you do. So do those things for now, and you will submit that on Blackboard, and try to have fun with it. That's the really nice thing about this, is that you can have fun.